start introductions down here.
Sure, Emily Nager, I'm from the Clinical Community Psychology program.
Oh, okay. You're Emily Nayer. So I just sent you an email recently,
yes,
so it's good to have the face to name. Go ahead, sorry.
I'm Dana Willis. I'm also
Okay.
Katie Denise, and I'm also in the clinical.
Okay, great.
I'm Emma Kate Wright. I'm in the school psychology group.
Okay. Go ahead.
Took a class in the social work PhD program.
Okay.
Karen Howie, exercise.
Okay.
Michelle, I'm in epidemiology department.
Okay.
I'm Allie Willingham and criminal justice.
And what?
Criminal justice.
Oh, great. Okay.
I'm Tara Martin in criminal justice.
Okay. Great.
Kelly Reardon, I'm speech language pathology.
Okay.
Patricia Bender, school of public health.
Okay.
Sean Wong from anthropology department.
Awesome. Okay.
Dumbiri Onyaja, Health Policy and Management.
Okay, great. Me?
Doug Bell from Marine Science.
Oh, science, yay! I'm not part. Okay, so, because I'm marine science. So I'd like to know who all are strictly graders in their responsibilities. Anybody? Okay, so 3, 4 of y'all? Great. And then who of y'all just do lab sections and do some grading with labs? You do? Yes, obviously. What else do we have in here? What other responsibilities do y'all have for being a TNA over here? Pop quizzes, okay, great.
Yeah, going over tests.
So you're a recitation leader type of thing?
This just assignment here. I'm mostly a grader, which is look over all the exam, or sometimes take the exams before.
Okay, great. What about over here? What are y'all's responsibilities that you guys do?
I do whatever they need to work.
Okay, that's understandable. What has it been so far since we're halfway through now?
Mostly grading. Take the exams as well.
Okay.
And if they ever have to miss a class period, I'm sure they teach.
Oh, wow. Okay, great. What about you guys? What else do y'all do?
I don't actually have a TA.
Not yet?
I have a GA.
Okay, got it.
I'm a GA as well.
You're a GA? Okay. What about you? So you're a GA too? Well, y'all will hopefully eventually will be teaching. What about over here with some more responsibilities that y'all do? You, I'm sorry. You're a grader? Oh, that's right. You're strictly a grader, and you.
Do the laboratory assistant, and then lab reports that I grade.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. And you exercise science.
I lecture.
That's right. And you've already started your lecturing with them too. So yeah. So very broad range of what people are doing. However, you all need to know what is important about how to be a responsible instructor whenever you're doing your grading responsibilities. So what I wanted to do is really let you guys see that there is this broad range, but there's some really key things that you all need to keep in mind as you go through your actual grading strategies. So hopefully your desk doesn't look like that. Mine has before, it's gotten really close. So this is what we'll be discussing. What are grades and what is a grading philosophy? And I think this is something that a lot of y'all have not yet considered, but it's something you should be thinking about as you develop your teaching skills, your little bag of tricks as you go through grad school. And I'm going to give you a couple of reliable techniques that you should keep in mind as you're going through your grading skills or your grading responsibilities, and give you some examples of what's a way to grade and how you can assess grading, how the students are actually doing. So essentially, what is a grade? It's what do y'all think without looking up here? Whenever you hear grade, what is the first thing that comes to mind to you? When you get a grade, what does it reflect on you? Evaluation, okay. What else? Progress, exactly, progress. How your professor thinks that you are doing with respect to the course material. And a grade really should also be an evaluation from the professor, from you guys, of what you think about how that student is doing. Not necessarily just a letter grade or a number grade, but feedback is really key to grading. And there are studies that show that grades are a predictor how well they do on their grades, are a predictor of how well they will do further on in their college career. And that's kind of obvious, but they actually do studies of that. So, but grades are important to your students. They want their grades, even more so I think than years past. Students are more concerned about what the grade is than actually learning the material. And I know that's kind of frustrating for you guys. Because like I said to you guys before, y'all are the cream of the crop. Y'all are here because you love what you're doing and you want to move on in your field. But sometimes it's really frustrating when students just care about the grade that they're getting. They don't care about anything else. So it's a fact of life that the students you have to give them a grade, but it's also stressful for them as well. So no matter how much you couch getting a poor grade in your class, sometimes it just really freaks students out, and you'll get frantic emails from students saying, how can I raise my grade? And you guys will all get those towards the end of the semester if you haven't already gotten some. So, all right. So, kind of already talked about what is the purpose of grades. It's to help students improve their performance. Y'all's job as a TA or an IA is to help students get good grades by how you guide them through the course itself. If you're actually teaching the course, even as a grader, your feedback on what you grade helps guide them in what they're going to do later on in the course itself. And that's really key, is to provide that feedback. It also allows you to tell them kind of how you think they're actually doing, kind of gives them some feedback on what you think their potential is in the course and how they can improve that. Always give them positive feedback. And it also, grades from students tell you how well you're getting the material across. If all of your students are getting Fs on their exams or their papers, there's something that's not clicking between you and what you're saying to your students. So always keep that in mind whenever you evaluate how students do on an exam or on a paper or whatever it might be. So what I would like to do is have you guys kind of think about what a grading philosophy is. And that is really what it is that you consider grades reflect, an A grade versus an F grade. What the meaning is, what failure actually means. To some people, failure is a 0. To some people, in graduate studies, sometimes failure is a 70. So that's something that you should think about, is what that actually means for you as a grader or as an instructor. And what are things that you should put into a grade that you give? Do you factor in attendance? Do you factor in participation? These are things you need to start kind of rolling around in your head when you're grading for a particular class. Should you weight assignments differently? And sometimes y'all don't have control over that because you didn't write the syllabus, which is quite often the case. But you should think about that whenever you're considering whether you should count a pop quiz to be more than a typical in-class quiz that is actually assigned. And then grade distribution, we'll talk about that in a second, and we'll talk about borderline cases in a second. So what I'd like to do next is you guys kind of group together in like 3s and 4s and talk about these 4 questions. What does an A grade mean to you? What is an F grade? What should not be factored into a grade? And should you consider borderline cases? Do you have questions? Oh, no, it's okay. And the borderline case, what I mean is by, say a student gets a 79, do you bump, or 79.4, do you bump them up to the B, or you keep them at the C+? So why don't you go ahead and group together and kind of scratch down y'all's considerations for these 4 questions, and then we'll talk about it. I'll give y'all about 5 minutes. So meet each other, meet your cohorts, let's discuss these. Perfect. 3, 4, 4, 3.
A complete understanding of the material that was presented.
Yeah, it means like a good understanding.
I mean, and it's got to be of what was presented too, I guess, not just everything that could possibly be known about the subject. Yeah. Basically, yeah. So an F. And that's
Totally missed the boat. What do you think?
I think maybe he's not going to be able to reflect what he knows.
yeah,
That could be the case in that.
yeah.
They just don't know it.
They just don't know it. They just don't know it. They don't care to know it either. Yeah.
You can't say that.
So what factors? So there's what, like
effort.
there's effort, and then there's representation of your knowledge too. broken down in certain ways too.
So we way more like you go for representation. I think it's not important how they represent.
Well, I guess depending on
The important is
like
how's it working.
paper grades, attendance should not be factored in. But it's like their final grade. Is that what we're talking about?
I think she was just like,
You get a C.
I think it depends. I mean, there's some classes that community students love to discourse, like the kids and then especially the lab, you have to be there. If you think
Well, I know that it's done and that's kind of fun. I think they should be factored in. People need to know how to spell. Well, what are you going to do in your job in the future? Like, turn in crap stuff? I think it should be fun.
well, why am gonna, I mean, I understand why you say should be factored with it, but I don't necessarily think that we should be so strict about that. Because we have like an institution, probably more than outside which you teaching them in the comfort of like English environment, maybe not going back home to China, whatever, and it's basically like they really conveying what they need to convey, irrespective of if they didn't get the eye, like can you get the concept of what you expect them to get, are they really getting it? That's why I don't really think we should be very like strict, you know, because we're not doing like an explicit English class, except it's an English class. If it's an English class, we're dealing with them. It's different because you're teaching the students how to communicate.
Do you just do it for everybody who's on that borderline?
Not everybody would do it.
I think you have to be very strict when you set up the boundaries for a grade, right? I mean,
Then like they would not be like, not everybody would be there on the
Yeah.
borderline. They'd be like one or two students.
I don't know. Because when it's 79 before, it's not 80, it's a 79. That's the way it is sometimes. It should be like, well, close enough, right? Because that's the same thing you're talking about. They should some entitlement to it.
Or you can review the paper again, maybe.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it. Yeah,
Or you can give some more somewhere where you
because it is
If
just
you
a
can
few
justify
points
it.
too.
Yeah.
Because it is. When it comes down to it, it might just be a couple points out of 500.
But you give it to her, you don't give it to her.
But she's trying.
Then it becomes really like extra.
I think if we work on that for you deserve that half point. If you pre-say that you're gonna count attendance and participation into the final grade, then that's different.
Yeah.
But if that's not included in the syllabus, then you can't just.
Most people say that because they say class.
Well, not everybody. Well, my school's not everybody.
That's how a lot of them say like you really.
Sorry, we're having a good conversation. Well, I think y'all have all gotten through those 4 questions. Tell me what y'all talked about when you discussed what does an A grade mean to you as you're grading. It may mean something different as your graduate studies, in your graduate studies, but for the classes that you're grading, what does the A grade mean? Y'all tell me, what did y'all talk about? Okay. Okay, mastery of the material. Did y'all have, anyone else have anything else similar to that? So think about qualifying that. How well should it be mastered? That is a question you should ask for an A grade. Should it be 100% mastery? 95%-ish? I mean, you think about what you consider mastery is your knowledge is mastery. students will not be at that level of mastery in that class to be good at that class because they're just not at that level of development yet, and they're an undergraduate. So you need to keep that in mind, is your level of mastery is still a little bit less of what you expect a complete answer to be for an exam or for any other type of problem that you're grading. Okay? Any other thoughts about A grade? Yes?
I think mastery depends on whether it's content or skills. I'm a GA for the nursing department, and I think when you're having a clinical skills test, if your mastery, because I consider mastery 85%, but on a skills test, I wouldn't want my nurse to only be 85% proficient. I think that's where like a higher percentage comes in.
Yeah, awesome. And that's something that should be spelled out in the syllabus, hopefully it is, that if you're doing a skill set, mastery is 95% or better. Absolutely, I wouldn't want a nurse. What is the mastery level for yours, for that course?
They don't use mastery level. That's just, I used to be a teacher before I came back to grad school. That's what we used.
Yeah.
But in the nursing department, theirs is 93 to 100, isn't it?
Yep, yep. And some graduate school classes are, your A level is 93, 94 or above. It's not a 90. And then some undergrads level is 88, 87 is an A. So it depends on what you're hoping the students get out of it. What is that level of mastery? So that's something you want to kind of consider. What's an F grade? What did y'all say an F grade was?
No effort.
No effort at all? Okay, yep, absolutely. What else?
A lack of understanding, a relatively complete lack of understanding.
Complete lack of understanding. There's a big range of what is lack of understanding. I'm giving you guys an example of, actually if you want to go ahead and look at this handout, this is the Marine Science 210 grading example. The first two, it was out of 15 points. It was this writing assignment where they had to explain what an upwelling was. And they just had to give me very basic information. I gave them the rubric of how I was grading it. That they had to define an upwelling, what were the 4 aspects involved. They can use any sources they need to get that information, and how did they interact, and give an example. And then I counted off if there was any bad grammar and spelling. And the first two, student example 1 and 2, were 8 out of 15. So they were really kind of B's, or what is that, 8 out of 15 is barely passing it all. And then the third example, so you can kind of see where some of them started talking about what some of the aspects were, and maybe had some interaction involved, maybe not. Student example number 3, upwelling is a process where deep cold water rises, caused by wind, water then rises up, and that's all. You got 2 out of 15 points, so that's definitely an F grade. So there are levels of how poor students can actually do on an activity, but when we say an F level, really showing that there was either no effort put into it or just no attempts to master the material. And I think where the wiggle room comes in is when you're looking at B, C grades, is where do you set those lines of what is considered average knowledge. And that really depends on how would you define a C grade in your classes relative to an A or an F? What do y'all think?
Maybe they've mastered some things, but not everything.
Right, so certain aspects have actually been mastered versus others. What else? That's a good way to look at it. What else?
Maybe they cannot apply the knowledge to some different scenario that's there in the problem.
Good. So how they can apply it, how they can extrapolate it to different examples. So they know the basic information, but they can't do that higher level, higher order thinking. So those are kind of like your C grades. What should not be considered in grades? And this can vary depends on your department. Say you're in psychology or in the hard sciences, what typically is not considered in a grade or should not be considered in a grade? What do you not want your professor to consider in your grade? Whether you get an A or a B or a C or whatever. What do y'all think? What did y'all say? What did y'all talk about of what should not be considered in a grade?
Ideology, belief.
Absolutely. How a student feels. If a student is very straightforward, I'm answering this question because this is what you told me was right, but this is not what I believe, you can't grade them on that. You want to grade them on an objective assessment of did they answer the question, okay? And that's really key. Other factors should be whether they actually are participating or not. Unless the grade is a participation grade, If they never show up, but they get 100s on all their exams, they still get 100 on the course, even if they don't show up, if you don't have an attendance portion of the grade. What should you do about your borderline cases? What did y'all decide? Say you had a 79.4 grade. What are some things that you should think about with borderline cases? What did y'all decide?
Potentially reevaluate some of your grades.
Okay, good. So go back and kind of look at how they had done some other grades and see if maybe there were some places that they could have actually gotten some points back, or perhaps you graded them too easily. Those you would actually need to have the actual materials in front of you, but that's something you can think about. What's another thing that you can do about borderline? Yeah.
I didn't think too much about this, but I just thought of it like trends over time, if they're improving or if they're declining, and
Absolutely.
if they're on, if they showed improvement, give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. So if a student has like a 79.2 and you see that that student had a 20 on the first exam, a 60 on the second, 80 on the third, and a 90 on the fourth, and his average was whatever it was, 79.2, obviously that student has been improving and really been putting the effort in. And I would give that student the benefit of the doubt and bump the grade up. Why is it important to consider these borderline grade cases? When you think about what the grade distribution is here at the university, y'all remember we have plus grades and not plus grades. So say if your student was given a grade of a 77, I believe is where the plus grade begins. If they had a 76, they have a lower GPA than if they had a 77. So it makes a difference in their grade point. So that's something you should consider. Were you about to say something? Okay. Any other comments about reconsidering borderline cases? But you should be, sorry.
We were talking about like, based on the objective cases you raised involving for one student. And then I remember when we had our orientation, we were talking about being fair to everyone.
Absolutely.
So if I say Miss A, because she's been doing well, she has 79, I'm going to give her 80. What are the rest of the folks who have 79, irrespective of they haven't been doing well or they've been doing well, what's going to happen to the rest of them?
You're absolutely right. So if you raise a 79 in your class up to an A or to an 80, you have to do that for everybody. And I always do that with all of my grades. I see if anyone has a 79.2 or higher, they always get bumped up, or 79.1 or higher, they always get bumped up to the 80. If they have a 78.8, they stay there at the 78.8. They get the C+. Okay, but they don't get bumped up to the B. So you absolutely must be fair across the board if you're going to do that. Okay. Good point, definitely. So what we just talked about here is a grading philosophy, how you feel, how you should respond to different situations with grading. And the two, we're not going to go through all four of these, but I want to show you there's about four different ones. There's the normative grading, and I'm going to talk about the normative and the criterion grading today. Normative has to do with how everyone else is doing relative to each other, whereas criterion grading is what we're used to. You have, if you get this certain number of points, you're in the A category. This certain number of points, you're in the B category. Some places you have, everyone starts out with an A, and if you do poorly or if you don't attend, you start getting points docked. That often is performance-based types of classes, as well as number 4 is a subjective assessment according to student potential. And some of your higher level graduate courses are number 4. It's kind of subjective based on the professor, which kind of sucks. So let's talk about numbers 1 and 2. Number 1 is your bell curve, okay? Grading on a curve is what number 1 is. So it assumes that everybody in your course, who has a course that they're grading for that has more than 100 students in here, okay? Several of y'all. Who has any that are less than 50? A few of y'all. So it's kind of some of both. So in any course, what the bell curve, what the normative grading assumes is that the majority of your students fall within this one standard deviation. About 68% of your students will be the majority of your students, and you have a few on the outward tails, the high achievers and the low achievers. What normative grading scales do is that over the entire total of your students, this proportion is set. 68% of your students will receive your C grades, this percent will receive your B, this is your D, this is your F, and this is your A. Okay, and has anybody had a course that actually has that set for them, where only a certain number of A's are given and a certain number of B's are given or C's are given? Has anybody had that type of course before? Yeah, I did. Y'all have. And so it's kind of frustrating, isn't it? Because you know you're doing well, but if out of a group of 15 students, if there's at least 5 students who are actually maybe doing better than you, but you're all doing well, they'll still get the A's and you don't. You know, that kind of sucks. It really sucks. So these grades are preset percentages, and it really is a ranking of learners, of students' performances relative to others. Disadvantages. Is it reasonable to think that your students will fit into a perfect bell curve? Is it? No, it's not. And some of your, and I hate to be, to generalize, but in my non-majors course, right now they're all kind of at the lower end of the bell curve. But I'm not going to grade them that way. I'm going to grade them, if they are going to get all the points that I ask them to for an A grade, they'll get an A grade, okay? So the thing is that sometimes it's justifiable. Some professors can say it's justifiable when you have a large number of students, but how many of y'all actually think it's a fair way to give a grade based on a bell curve? I don't think so. I mean, that's my personal opinion, that it's not fair. If you're still doing really well, if you show the level of mastery for an A grade, you should get the A grade, no matter how many other students in the class get that grade. Okay. So the problems that can come with using this type of curved grading system is that students who know that this is going to happen aren't going to help other students, because they know that if they help that other student and makes them do better, it can affect whether they actually get that higher grade that they want or not. It can cause errors between the cut points, that if you can only have 10 students get the A, if you have another student that say that was at the number 11 cut point, but he had an 89.9, he still gets the B plus. And so that can be pretty unfair as well. And then who are you referring, who's your reference group? When you're comparing your students to other students, say between classes, between semesters, between years, are you comparing your class to a year that you happen to have a ton of really bright students, or is that how it's being compared? So there's problems associated with this grading curve, using the bell curve as your grading philosophy. Criterion grading is what we're used to. It's based on setting percentages, how many points are needed to get the A, the A minus, the B, and so forth. It's a standard level that you set that anyone can reach if they do the assignments and they follow the instructions and actually answer the questions based on what your level of A mastery versus B mastery is. And so everyone, again, can make an A if they reach those expectations that you've set. And so this is really the way that USC does the majority of its grading. It does depend on the instructor, but it also tends to be what people are recommended to actually do their grading. So this is your typical criterion base. If you get an A, it's going to be mastered, major and minor objectives, course goals. B is very good, C satisfactory, D very weak, and F just hardly any mastery at all, less than 60%. So that's our typical grading scale for criterion-based grading. And so you can compare them, and really normative compared to criterion, it almost is there's no comparison. Which one is actually the better one versus the other. The problem with the criterion is that if you look at the second row there, sometimes you can have clustering of grades, and that sometimes throws up flags with certain departments. They're saying, well, if you have too many students getting A's, I think that you're giving grades away. And that's called grade inflation. It can be a problem in certain departments. You have to worry about that and wonder about that. But if you are very straightforward in what it is that the requirements are for a student to get that grade, if someone questions that, you can say, this is what they were required to do, all these students met these requirements, therefore those are the grades that I gave them. Normative grading tends to encourage competition between students, whereas criterion encourages collaboration. They want to help each other out because they're not going to be dinged on their grade because they did help somebody out. And really normative, as long as they can get that A level, they don't have to improve anything else. You don't want that. You want them to learn their material. You want them to develop new skills because they're interested in actually learning. So again, as I said, USC's policy tends to be criterion grading, but it does depend on the professor. Are any of y'all in a graduate level class that is based on the bell curve here at USC, on the normative grading? Hopefully not. That tends to actually not be approved here anymore. So, but whatever your philosophy is, you have to make sure that how you grade is how the department views grading should be done. You don't want to have a criterion-based grading scheme and everyone else in your department does normative. Students will find out about that and they won't see that. Well, they will actually see it's fair, but the other students will find out and be upset about that. And you want to make sure that if you're teaching the actual class as well, if you're expecting them to have a very high level of mastery, you want to make sure that you're actually giving assessments that is testing that mastery. You don't want to ask them for, say you're asking questions on your assignments that are asking these really high level thinking skills, but then it's not something that you're actually supposed to be testing for in the course itself. So I want to talk a little bit about some techniques that you should be incorporating into your classes or into your grading itself. So how many of y'all use or have, first of all, how many of y'all have used rubrics in your classes? Okay, good. How many of y'all don't even know what a rubric is? Hopefully you all have because you went to the workshops. That's a good thing. So how many of y'all that use rubrics give your rubrics to your students before they turn in the assignments? Absolutely, and you should. That's a fair way for students to understand what it is that they're expected to do on the assignment and see kind of in advance that you are going to be fair in your grading practices. And when you use rubrics, it's actually much easier than to get a percentage grade because it's easier to use a scale on the rubric and then scale that to a percentage. It's sometimes hard to assess an A versus a B sometimes if you don't use the actual points. So it makes it much easier to grade when you use points rather than just A through F letter grades. It's recommended that you don't use 0 points because if you get a 0 on an assignment that you turned in something, students will be like, ah, screw this, I'm just not even going to try. You know, and they would. But, so you would want to say maybe you got a 60% or a 50%. You showed little mastery of the material, but don't give them 0s because then that really is discouraging for them. If you're grading essays, and those of you who have to grade essays or even short little writing assignments, you want to grade them all, each question by question. You don't want to grade an entire paper at once. And obviously don't know their names because you want it to be as unbiased as possible, especially in your smaller classes. Sometimes y'all don't have the time to read through them more than once. I know that I don't. But whenever you're grading something, you can always scan through it pretty quickly, see if they've gotten the major points, and then go back and actually read for content and understanding. Again, keep things blind, as in don't know who the student is that's actually writing them. You can, in Blackboard, actually grade anonymously, so you don't see the student names of those that you're grading, whatever the question is. That allows you to do that there. And always go back and double check grade calculations. I always misadd my grades. I'm so bad at that. Kind of sad. So, and then always give feedback. And I think with respect to feedback, and I'm going to talk about this in just a second, but this is probably the more important than anything else you give students, aside from their letter grade, give them feedback on how to improve. And that students appreciate, they want to hear how to improve, especially the ones that are really concerned about their grades. They need that feedback. So, fairness, key. Key to be objective, key to be fair in how you grade all of your students' assignments. Problems will occur in fairness if there's certain things that you do while you're grading that you don't realize that you're doing. If you don't communicate what you expect to get from a student's work, they're not going to do well. And the best way to tell them what you're expecting is to give them a rubric. And as I said with this assignment for the marine science writing assignment, I told them this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the definition of an upwelling. I'm looking that you address the biological, the physical aspects, these 4 aspects. Therefore, if they miss a point, they know exactly why, because they did not talk about those particular things I asked them to. Lack of consistent criteria, again, use the rubric, and I'm going to show you how to set up a rubric in a second. But if you're looking for, say you're doing a writing assignment, and you want, one of the criteria is having good grammar. Set that explicitly in the rubric and say, I'm looking to make sure you guys have good grammar. If you don't, you're going to be docked for it. And if you don't have these rubrics, a single grader can evaluate the same task, the same assessment differently at different times. Or different graders can assess the same task, the same assessment differently at the same time. So that's the key to rubrics is, say you are one of many TAs teaching this one particular section, several sections. You want to keep it as consistent as possible because students do talk, absolutely do talk. Okay, so you've got to make the effort to be fair. That way if students do challenge you on your grades, you can say, this is how I graded you. You can see it point by point. What's your next question? Okay. Has anybody had any students challenge their grades at this point so far? Okay, great. What was the situation?
I mean, they're short answer questions. They are calculations, and I give them partial credit, and they've come back and said, I mean, they were totally off base. But
Yeah.
So I always make sure that I can defend it if they challenge.
Absolutely. And one thing, especially with problems, and that's a good point, is that when you're doing problems where you're grading based on completion, not just completion of getting the right answer, but showing their work, one good thing that you should always do with your problems, and you probably do this, is you grade that same question across them all, so you can see that if students miss a certain part, you always take off the same amount for every student, because they'll compare between you as well. Was there anything else that was said by the student about that situation? Was it just because they thought they deserved more partial credit?
And they didn't see what they did wrong.
Yeah. And I always, in those cases, whenever I grade, I always have my own little miniature rubric for how much I take off for each part of partial credit assignments. And that way I always remember, and if a student asks, I can show this is how I graded everybody's. So, what was yours?
I'm the same thing, asking for partial credit and why, but I give them the rubric back after I grade it, so they all get broken down grades of the reports.
Yeah, exactly. And this was a lab report? Yeah. So lab reports, you should have rubrics. Even small essays, even workout problem assignments should have miniature rubrics that you use. That's the best way to support why you give a student a particular grade. Any other comments about fairness issues with grading that y'all might have come across? Anything in your own classes in grad school that you maybe don't want to talk about? That's okay. Hopefully not. Okay, what I wanted to show you guys, and I know you've seen this before, but I actually wanted to go into Rubistar and show y'all this is the most amazing, easiest thing to do ever. So all you have to do is say who you are, and then when you go into Rubistar, you always enter in 29208, and that is USC's zip code, because it gives USC credit and allows you to use it for free, allows it to continue for free because it's based on some federal funding. So just go into, it'll ask you to set up a password eventually. If you go in, you just log in, but always use zip code 29208. And then what you do, there's a couple different ways. You can say what kind of, you can create a new rubric, or you can actually search, and there's all sorts of different types of rubrics. You can actually search for a particular rubric itself. And so let me go to find a rubric, and let's search for lab reports, until I've done this before. And search. And it's taking a little bit. Oh great, of course it would. Come on. There's a bunch of lab reports. I think it's part of the problem. All right, what's another one? Math problem. Okay, it will give you pages of results of different types of math problems you can do, or rubrics for math problems. But let me show you how you can create a rubric. Let's say we're going to create a rubric that is a lab report. So you go in there, set that up, and then you say, all right, my category is, I want my students to have a, let's start with, where's my introduction? Question purpose. it fills in for you the 4 levels. You can set, actually you can have 5, you can have 10. The automatic setting is for 4. Once you tell it what the category is, what the question or purpose is, it fills in the levels for you. You don't have to do it at all. It does it for you. You can go in and change it and edit it and say that a level 4 is actually clearly defined, clear purpose, versus level 1, there is nothing at all. You can go in and change that, but it does it for you. It's so easy. And then you can save it and use it later. Here's another one. If you wanted to say experimental design. Experimental design level 4 is well constructed versus level 1 is not even relevant. Does it for you. So easy, so fast. I cannot recommend it more. Rubistar is awesome. So take advantage of Rubistar definitely, because it's very helpful, saves a lot of time for you guys. All right, so let's talk about feedback. Again, I've talked about this a couple times already. Feedback is really key. And I think that any grading you do for any course should have some form of feedback. And formative feedback is the feedback that allows a student to modify how they continue to do in the course, how they continue to answer questions. It allows them to change their learning style or change how they're answering questions. You want to give them feedback that they can actually use to change how they're actually learning in the course itself. So what students want to be able to do from your feedback is say, okay, where am I actually doing pretty good? All right, where do I need some work? Am I not getting how to apply something, or am I just understanding the basic concepts and can actually take it that next step? How can I make my answers better? Okay, that's what they can get from formative feedback. This is more important than really, yes, they need the grades to get their grade, actual grade itself in the course, but the feedback is how they learn, how they develop as an undergraduate. This Marzano is a educational designer who really, what he does, what his actual research focuses is how students become better learners. It's educational learning type of research. And so he's really one of the people that says that the most important thing that a professor, an instructor can do is provide feedback. And that's how you can improve education for undergraduates. So if your feedback is to help a student, to give them this formative feedback so that they become better students, what you need to do is make sure it's timely. Make sure you give that feedback as soon as possible. You're not turning lab reports in for 2 weeks after they turned it in. They don't remember what they did 2 weeks ago. They hardly remember what they did 2 days ago. So make sure it's timely and make sure that they can actually perhaps turn it in again and correct the comments that you actually gave them. Make sure that your feedback is focusing on what they were supposed to learn. Don't say, you missed this question because you didn't incorporate the entire idea of what marine science is. When the question asks, what is weight? Something that obvious. That's kind of an extreme example. But make sure you're focusing on what the question was actually asking in the first place. Give them descriptive information. Say, the reason why this question was missed is because you didn't give me the details that I asked for. Be very specific in what you were asking them. That is why they missed that problem, whatever it might be. And allow students to reflect on how they missed it and maybe turn something back in. If they didn't do well on the paper, give students a second chance and say, you can raise your grade or replace your grade. If you go back, revise it, think about what comments I've given you, turn it back in and show me that you've actually learned from this and be able to improve what you've actually done. So I highly recommend allowing students to resubmit materials to show that they've actually gotten something out of the feedback you've given them. Really let students know, say, if this is the reason why you missed this, maybe the next time you do a problem like this, think about what are the variables that you have to incorporate first before you actually try and solve the problem. So tell them what your thinking strategy is. The best thing that you can show students is how you would actually think through a problem or write something out, because that's how they see your thinking process and how they can apply it to themselves. So assessment without feedback, it misses the point. You want to give them formative feedback so they can improve how they're actually learning. So I already talked about the writing assessment. This was just showing y'all what the question was, the points that were available. I gave them this. This was the actual assignment in Blackboard on a piece of paper that I handed out in class. Told them specifically, You will get a point taken off. If you have poor grammar, you will get a point taken off or more if you don't give examples. And still, I had students turning in very subpar materials. And all I can say is, this is how I'm grading. This is how I did grade. This is why you missed it. So, okay. So, grading on attitude, participation. Some courses do ask that students participate, and you grade them based on participation. Sometimes it's hard to grade participation, yes.
Do you continue to give them feedback if they keep not listening to the feedback?
Yes, always.
Always.
And that's more so that if a student says, well, you stopped giving me feedback, so I just assumed that I was doing everything fine, everything correctly, and I still just, you need to be able to support your grade every time, no matter how poorly or how well they're doing it, so absolutely. Make sure that you can justify any decisions you make if you're grading based on participation or effort. It has to be in a rubric. It should be in a rubric. One way that you can grade participation is have the criteria telling them what tasks will get a particular grade. Have a pop quiz to make them show that they're actually doing effort and reading the materials in advance. Tell students that you're actually reading them and recognize that they're giving a lot of participation and effort. However, you're not grading them on the effort. Sometimes, even though they put in a lot of effort, it still is just a really bad paper. And you know they tried really hard, but you still have to grade them objectively on whether they answered the question or not. And those are tough grades to get, unfortunately. Group work. All I'm going to say about group work, how many of y'all have group work in your classes that you're grading? Is anybody? You do? How do y'all grade your group work?
They're getting graded. They're grading each other in the group.
Okay, so it's peer
and
assessment.
then they're working with an outside agency, and they're going to be giving feedback on them as well.
Oh, that's good. So it's peer assessment, and then the outside agency is giving them assessment as well.
So it's kind of a 360.
Okay. Well, that's a good way to do it. I typically don't like group work because often one student will kind of carry the entire group, and that's not fair to that student. Probably you guys, if y'all did group work, y'all were the one that carried the entire rest of the students. And no student's grade should depend on how others are doing. If other people are doing poorly and you get graded down because of that, that's not fair to you, especially if you're putting in more work. So I have issues with group work grades. So just some considerations with participation. Sometimes it's useful, sometimes it's a motivator to students to have participation grades. My participation grades in my classes are the pop quizzes that are attendance quizzes. I actually give them points just for being there for the quiz itself, and then if they get the question right, they get bonus points on top of that. That kind of is a participation and effort grade. But the problem with participation and effort grades is that it really doesn't let you see whether they're mastering the material. And that can be a problem, especially in, for example, hard sciences. You don't want to have so much participation grade that they pass it because they participated, not that they actually knew the material. And it's difficult to define what actually is participation. For some people, it's very difficult to participate because they're very shy students. So you want to be able to give leeway to some who are not willing to speak out versus those who are your chatty Cathys that talk all the time. And again, participation should not count more than content unless it's an arts type of course. And so many students really expect to have grades. If they show up, they expect to have a grade. And have you guys been having that problem in your courses where students are expecting to get a grade because they show up? Not in labs? I guess, you're teaching majors though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm pretty straightforward.
Yeah. What about you? Are they expecting their grade?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or if they turn something in.
Yeah. And they do, and that's frustrating. I know it's frustrating for you guys. That if they turn something in, they're expecting a good grade for it, just by having actually been there and done some of the work. So how do y'all handle that? How do y'all handle students expecting to get a good grade in a course? How would y'all handle that? And they don't get the grade they want, so they complain to you.
You ask about the preparation.
Yeah, great. You would ask them, so what exactly did you do to prepare for this? Did you read the chapter? No. What else? What else would y'all do?
Ask them why they deserve the grade.
Yes, very good. Say, why do you think you deserve an A? And if they give reasons that sound good, then you say, well, did you do that? Did you actually prepare that way? And they'll often say no, because they didn't. Hopefully, they'll tell the truth.
Using rubrics, I think, is also a good example of the rubric again with that.
Exactly.
Let's go for everybody.
Yep. So have the rubric to support why they got that grade and not what they actually wanted. So awesome. And obviously participation can be affected by some students just are much shyer than others, or some of your Asian students tend to be much more quiet and respectful compared to, and I hate to be generalizing, but tend to be a little bit more respectful and not speak up because that's the way that what they learned in their own courses in their home country. So it does depend on personality and cultural issues as well with participation types of grades. And I think none of y'all are arts and humanities, right? No. What were you again? Social work. That's right. So I'm going to skip over performances. I don't think anybody has performances here. Grade inflation, I just wanted to mention, I've actually talked about this already, that this is a problem in some universities. It's really not here, but it is in some of your liberal arts universities where students are being given the A's and B's, but as long as you have a rubric, then great, you won't be questioned if you have students getting all A's and B's. So I want you to skip over this since we're running out of time. So I gave you a couple of quotes about low grades. Essentially, low grades should not be used as punishment. You should judge their actual performance as it is matching what is required for them to get a good grade in the course. You don't want to punish using low grades saying, well, you didn't try as hard as I expected you to, therefore I'm going to grade you lower. You don't want to do that at all. Students will see that and recognize that you're being unfair and will just stop. They don't want to continue on and working in the course and trying hard. So students will complain. I'm sure that you will get this eventually. The two common complaints from students are that what you taught was not what was tested. And that's why having very defined learning outcomes has really become important in education and higher learning. Making sure that when you test something, you're telling students this is what I will be testing. I will be looking that you understand the terms as well as how to apply it. And then being fair in grading, using your rubrics, being objective in your grading strategies. So any questions? We still have a couple more minutes. Let me hear any questions that you might have about problems that you've had in grading or other issues that may have popped up with y'all's responsibilities. Anything?
I found it a little bit difficult to be similar to another TA who's got 2 labs and I have 2 labs. And one week they think I grade harder, and the next week they think he grades harder. And it's just, they want points here, points there.
Yeah, because they do compare in the larger classes.
Yeah,
they absolutely
they
compare.
absolutely.
So how do you think would be a good way of getting around that issue?
We've started communicating a lot better now.
Yep.
Just to make sure that we're fair.
Yep. And even giving each other your miniature rubric, saying this is what I'm taking off of this, and
Yeah,
this.
we have the same one.
Yep, that's exactly what I would do, is share mini rubrics, personal rubrics. What's some other issues that have come up?
It's a little anxiety provoking around
Yes.
and you feel very powerful, but I mean, you're worried about
Yes. And I actually enter in my grades straight into Blackboard. I don't upload Excel or anything like that simply for that very reason.
Well, yeah, the first time really using that job and I got to feel like
Right.
just having
Yes. And yeah, I totally understand. And that's why you always double check what you enter in Blackboard and triple check. Even for simple assignment grades and bonus points, I always go back through. And I have 200 students, but I still make that point to go back. Because if something happens, then you have to go through the steps of having to deal with the grade change and all the repercussions from that. So yeah, it is kind of anxiety. So little anxiety issues there. Anything else? Any other comments about what y'all had to deal with so far? Y'all are quiet.
Another difficulty of the material.
Yeah. And what do you mean by that exactly?
They find the course very difficult. Very, very difficult.
Compared to how
I don't
you
know, their
did
100
it.
class, yeah.
Yeah.
They have a difficult teacher, so it's presenting them not quite graduate level material, but not basic material either. So
Yeah.
that proportion of, maybe 10% will get an A is based on a normal grading system. It's not going to be like that. So that's why probably a curving system.
Right. And I don't have an issue with curving. I think that curving can help bolster a student's opinion of the class, and knowing that there will be a curve, they'll still try hard. But I think that a curve is important when issues like that, where a professor is expecting too much from the class, and the class is not at that level yet. Therefore, I don't know. There's kind of both ways of looking at it. Some people say never curve. Some people say do curve, because it makes students want to continue on in the field more. So, any other comments about that?
I have an assignment that they just turned in yesterday, where they're grading their own reading reflections. And it's been, I don't know if it sways, how I look at what they're writing, but I was kind of thinking after I started looking at their own grading, whether or not I should just ignore that first and go through and do it myself, and then compare the two.
Well, I think having them, so they're grading each other's work.
No, they're grading their own.
Okay.
So I turn in my paper with the rubric, and I highlighted how I think I did. Some of them are pretty hard graders.
Yeah.
Themselves.
If only that's a good exercise for them to recognize what is expected versus what they're actually producing. And I think that's worthwhile for them to do. And then show them, like you said, this is then how I would actually grade it, and look about where's the disconnect between them, and think about why there's a disconnect. Where is it that you're not seeing that effort is more important than what you're actually giving? You know what I mean? So.
I haven't graded anything down. I've graded a couple of them out.
Yeah.
They did better.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Interesting. Let's go ahead. If you haven't done the evaluations, please let me. Please be sure and fill out the evaluations. They're always important for me to change how I do this particular presentation.